tragedy of trust. Imagine a person in a boat and another in a helicopter. The helicopter pilot was supposed to direct the boater to safety, but he keeps messing up again and again. The day gets longer, the boater is late for other events, and is getting more cynical about the motivation of the helicopter pilot. Finally, the boat is about to go over a waterfall. The pilot has lowered a rope ladder and is yelling, "Grab it, please." Closer to the edge, the boater is standing there with his nose in the air, pretending not to notice. He won't grab the aid. He'd rather go over the waterfall. At least he can trust the waterfall to do its job. Let's not beat around the bush with this. The boater is us. The helicopter is government, society, or any official body, and the rope ladder is an attempt to better our situation, even start to rebuild trust again. One of these moments is, tragically, basic income itself. There is context for this as well. A member of Richard Nixon's administration told him that if things did not change, trust in institutions would be eroded. To quote Daniel Patrick Moynihan in 1967, "Look, we are in a situation approaching anarchy. The confidence and trust in institutions, the necessary institutions holding together a society, is dwindling, drying up. Liberals and conservatives have come together to try to address people's real needs. Otherwise, this society is going to collapse. The social contract will go, and we won't have enough respect for institutions to keep going." Taken from a speech by Scott Santens. The other piece of evidence comes from the pilot that happened in Finland. Contrary to rumors set out by media, whose bias ironically continues to erode trust as people realize they have to compare and contrast, quote, doing their own research to arrive at truth. The pilot was not a failure, as explained by frustrated Guy Standing, an economist, professor, and longtime basic income researcher. Guy has been on the ground in pilots around the world since the ones in Namibia and India in the early 2000s. Here's Guy Standing.
The Finnish experiment, on which I was involved right at the beginning in 2017, was designed as a 2-year pilot. A 2-year pilot. In other words, it had to begin at a certain day and end on a certain day, December the 31st, 2018. Right? Contrary to what the BBC and the Guardian wrote, it was never stopped. It was never abandoned. It began on January the 1st and ended on 31st of December 2018. It was not a failure. It was not abandoned. But because the finance minister was at the near the beginning, was on the right-wing party, he didn't want it to be what we wanted it to be, which was a basic income system. So what it was a non-conditional unemployment benefit for 2,000 unemployed. I keep telling people that is not a basic income. I must have said it 1,000 times, and still I get asked this question. It wasn't abandoned. On its own terms, it was very successful because it showed that you didn't need to have all those behavioral conditions for the unemployed, because it didn't lower their work rate. It didn't stop them working. In fact, many of them started up secondary activities, craft work and so on. And it resulted in huge measured improvements in health, mental health, physical health, and feelings of life satisfaction. But for me, it is not a proper basic income. A proper basic income is when everybody in the community, regardless of work status, regardless of marital status, regardless of income status, receive the basic income. And it has network effects. It has community effects. It has feedback effects. It improves health in the community, improves the social atmosphere, the resilience of the communities. And where we've done proper basic income pilots, as I've listed them in the appendix of the 2 books on the subject, they've had these very positive effects. Improvements in health, improvements in schooling, improvements in work, improvements in status of women, improvements of status of people with disabilities, and so on. So for me, it was an interesting experiment. It's got a lot of publicity. It's been misrepresented, but it's not a proper basic income experiment.
But along with the pilot having the usual effects of better health, increased security, increased feelings of security, which actually did result in work commencing, there was an increased feeling of trust. explained and discussed by fellow longtime advocate, fellow economist and professor of political philosophy, Karl Widerquist. It resulted in trust in institutions and even increased interest in voting. With both of these clips, I've extracted them from larger talks from over an hour in length. You can dig into more of these in the playlist list I've created, which is available on through this. If you look below in my description. Here's Professor Widerquist.
Okay, I would like to sort of react here more than a question. I think this is like a lesson for people who are interested in basic income and aren't always interested in statistics. Because this something that sounds like such a small, tedious little study. Oh, did they vote more in Finland? But actually, you ask that little question and you get these enormous implications of this question. Is that we're just looking at the correlation of UBI and voting, but being able to interpret this about trust in my fellow citizens and in the government of the society that I live in. And this really hits me because this is really the exact type of thing that my philosophy predicts, that we spend so much time trying to get the less privileged to prove to us that they're worthy of our help, that they need to jump through this hoop and that hoop and the other hoop to earn our trust, and then we will help them. And the way they earn our trust is typically to work for us. Oh, you underprivileged person, get a job and work for a more privileged person. Then we will trust you. Then we'll know you're a good person. Then, we will surely help you. But often in countries where we do that, we actually help the less advantaged less. And when you do this, you create a culture of distrust. We think about what do they have to do to earn our trust, and we never think of what do we have to do to earn their trust. But of course, if you have a society that is divided into the privileged and those with very little privilege and distinctly out groups, it is the people with privilege who really need to earn the trust of the others. If you want to build a trusting society, it begins by those who have privilege earning the trust of those who have the least. And this, I believe, is most effectively done with unconditional aid to the people who need it the most. And I think Finland and countries like Finland are already farther in that direction than a lot of other countries, but this shows that they've got further to go. That's not a question, but that's just my reaction. Maybe you two would like to react to my reaction.
Yeah, I think it's very true. To be trusted, you need to prove that you're trustworthy. So that's just so linked. Trust and trustworthiness can really not be separated out at all. So yeah, I think this is the most important component of trust, is to create a trustworthiness. So
and it's also like fostering a trusting society. You foster a trust society we start out by trusting you. Whereas where I live, we live in such a very suspicious society. And it's a climate of fear and anger, I think. It is what it fosters.
Yeah, I think it rings very true what you're saying, especially if you just look through a very impartial lens on the mechanisms underlying that. What we see is that people with low SES disengage from politics because they feel that their preferences are not considered well enough. And they do feel that in part, as the data shows and other research shows as well, because they feel that they're distrusted, they feel that they have to jump through all the hoops to show that, and they don't feel that we as a society, the social institutions that we have, are responsive to their needs. So just simply from a practical point of view, I think it makes a lot of sense to first ask, how can we increase their trust in us, in the societal institution, other than asking how can they increase our trust in them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it's great to see some evidence that what I've suspected here is actually true, that UBI fosters trust. So I think it's a result that is much bigger than it sounds. You know, like, well, we're going to look at voting, UBI and voting sounds so small.
In Canada, we feel that the feeling of mistrust has become weaponized against basic income. The use of the Emergencies Act by Trudeau, by the Trudeau government in reaction, rightly or wrongly, to the protests in Ottawa was almost immediately used to show, see, look what a government can suddenly do to any one of us. This resulted in a furious campaign of disinformation that in my advocacy, I saw suddenly appearing in places like YouTube, I search every day when I build the playlist list, and Instagram. The target? Twin proposals by Winnipeg Centre MP Leah Gazan and Senator Kim Pate, Bill C-223 and Bill S-233 respectively, calling on the government to begin to discuss how to implement a guaranteed income in Canada. Most of the hatred increasingly has been directed at the Senate bill. Interesting, because the Senate can't actually pass laws. In fact, it's rare when they agree and a law comes from it. Also interesting for the following reasons. The longest running advocate in Canada for basic income is a conservative senator, Senator Hugh Segal, who has talked about it since the time of the 1971 Kroll Report. Not exactly a new idea. He saw the creation back then of the first of two guaranteed incomes in Canada, the Guaranteed Income Supplement for seniors. The other is the more recent Canada Child Benefit, which creates $2 of economic activity for every dollar spent. Canada is home to one of the most famous basic income pilots in the world, the 1974 to 1978 Mincome Project, which resulted in no marked reduction in work outside of new moms and kids going back to get their grade 12s. Post-secondary education increased, hospitalizations fell by 8.5%, teenage pregnancies fell, entrepreneurship increased, and even dental health improved. Nevertheless, the attack on not being able to trust something that could build trust was impressive, as explained by Senator Pauline Simmons, who, despite being a critic of the bill herself, has naturally come under fire as, quote, part of it. Here is Senator Simmons.
I rise today to speak to Bill S-233, an act to develop a national framework for a guaranteed livable basic income. Or rather, I rise today to speak to the viral misinformation and disinformation about this bill and to confront some of the near delusional paranoia circulating on social media about it. For weeks now, our Senate email and voicemail boxes have been overwhelmed by thousands of messages from angry, frightened Canadians who are outraged by S-233, or at least by the lies that they have been told about S-233. There are so many desperate letters sent to us by people who've been manipulated and terrified into believing outrageous conspiracy theories. There are letters from people who believe S-233 to be a fascist plot, a communist plot, a Masonic plot, an eugenics plot, a Jewish plot, a plot by the World Economic Forum or the World Health Organization, a sinister scheme orchestrated by, choose your choice, Klaus Schwab or George Soros or Bill Gates or the ever-popular Illuminati. Many believe Bill S-233 to be the first step on the path to one world government or the New World Order or to a system of state social surveillance such as the one the Chinese government in Beijing calls social credit. Others are convinced the bill contains provisions for digital ID or digital currency that will allow the government to track and control us all. This, my friends, is no accident. I believe there is an organized campaign afoot to spread destructive propaganda about Bill S-233, targeted online fear-mongering specifically designed to terrorize frightened seniors and those with disabilities, to scare vulnerable Canadians into believing their pensions and disability benefits are about to disappear. It is a campaign purpose-built to erode public trust, not just in this government, but in Canadian democracy itself. Take this tweet, posted on March 11th by Peter Terrace, a former Ontario candidate for the People's Party of Canada, and I quote, Bill S-233 is currently waiting for third reading in the Senate, in capital letters. If passed, it will be made law, which means if you are not vaccinated, you will not receive EI, CPP, OHS, social services, or pension that you paid into. That post alone has been retweeted almost 1,000 times, and pretty much every single word of it is untrue. Bill S-233 is not a government bill. It is not at third reading, and even if we were to pass it, we all know it would not become law. Not right away. It would, of course, be sent to the other place for more debate and study. This bill absolutely does not make the payment of a guaranteed basic income contingent on your vaccination status. Indeed, under the terms of Senator Pate's proposal, there would be no such type of social virtue testing or qualification for the receipt of such an income at all. Nor would a basic income take the place of employment insurance, workers' compensation insurance, the Canada Pension Plan, nor any other company or private pension. Even if we passed Bill S-233, it wouldn't create a guaranteed basic income. All the bill really does is call upon the government to consider how it might create a framework for how a possible future guaranteed basic income program might work. Nonetheless, Twitter and Facebook and Reddit and YouTube are filled with posts that repeat word for word the same falsehoods as the tweet I just read you. Many of the letters and phone calls we've received, though, go much further than fears about pensions. Some express concern that once Canadians become dependent on a guaranteed basic income, the government will be able to leverage that dependency to force people to conform. For example, here's an extended excerpt from an email I received on March 16th. Quote, I suspect that a guaranteed livable basic income creates a dependency upon government and lays down a foundation for creating digital identities tied to bank accounts and all other government agencies, both federal and provincial. Over time, abusive controlling powers would be assumed and invoked by dictatorial means. We would then be locked into a social credit system that is fascist, communistic, and totalitarian, thereby erasing the standards of democracy, our Constitution, the rule of law, and our guaranteed rights and freedoms. An email from March 23rd mined a similar vein. Quote, there will be more vaccines to take and other medical procedures the government wants you to undergo. If you don't comply with just one of them, your accounts will be closed and you won't be able to buy food. You won't be able to do anything, not even work. One recent email suggested Bill S-233 was part of what it called, quote, the sinister plan for humanity under a new world order and one world government, starting with John D. Rockefeller's Masonic Creed. The letter went on to link Bill S-233 to a long-term worldwide plot that included the assassinations of Martin Luther King and John F. Kennedy. Other messages linked Bill S-233 with transhumanism, a concern which is not, as I had first assumed, about gender identity, but about an alleged plot to turn us all into bionic cyborgs. Quote, the transhumanist war has begun. We are now experiencing the long-awaited planning of the sociopathic elite as Klaus Schwab unleashes a world domination plan with the intent of changing the face of humanity forever, said one. S-233 is just the beginning, wrote another correspondent. We are losing our freedoms to a group of elites who want to depopulate and control mankind, enslave us to experimental transhumanism, and the removal of any Christian and godly devotions. A common theme that runs through many letters is a persistent paranoia about the World Economic Forum, a belief that Justin Trudeau and Chrystia Freeland are subject to the control of German-Swiss economist Klaus Schwab. Many seem to believe that Schwab's agents have infiltrated the government and that Schwab, who's best known for throwing parties for plutocrats in Davos, is somehow simultaneously both a communist and a Nazi. This excerpt from a letter I received March 10th is pretty typical. Quote, nobody voted for Nazi Klaus Schwab. Nobody even knew he existed 2 years ago. He has nothing to do with Canada or any other country. Schwab holds a statue of Lenin in his office. This is not Canada. We are not going back to Nazi Germany. Please see the Nuremberg Code and trials. Other letters accuse senators and the Senate outright of treason. Quote, this is Canada, not North Korea, not Russia. You are employees of the people, not employees of the WEF or the WHO, reads an email I received March 6th. And just this afternoon, we probably all received the same email, was a letter that claimed that the adoption of a guaranteed basic income would lead to the forced sterilization of Canadians of childbearing age and the killing off of the elderly and the disabled. I must say, though, that many other letters are not from conspiracy theorists or anti-vaxxers at all. They are simply and heartbreakingly heartfelt notes from ordinary Canadian seniors and relatives of seniors who truly believe that this bill will steal their CPP and private pensions. As senators, we're all used to receiving angry letters and calls, but this campaign is qualitatively different. 3 years ago, my inbox was full of very angry mail about bills C-69 and C-48. But even when some of those concerns were hyperbolic, exaggerated, they were based on fact, on the actual content of those bills. The campaign against S-233 is something entirely different. It is a shadow war concocted and orchestrated to protest something that doesn't even exist. Now, some of you may worry that by reading these letters into the Hansard record, I'm giving these theories undeserved attention. But we cannot ignore the elephant in the room. We must call out these myths and lies. So let us be clear. There is nothing in Bill S-233 that would require any Canadian to be vaccinated or medicated. There is nothing in Bill S-233 that relates to digital ID or digital tracking or digital currency. There is nothing in Bill S-233 that is in any way akin to the Chinese social credit surveillance model. Senator Kim Pate, who has spent her entire adult life advocating for the civil rights of the vulnerable, the marginalized, and the forgotten, is not an agent of Klaus Schwab. She is not part of a globalist elite, nor a Davos hobnob. And as her long record of public service attests, she is the last person who'd ever want to see a single Canadian lose a pension or a job, and that's why her bill does nothing of the kind. Also, I'm pretty sure I can attest personally that Senator Tate is not hell-bent on turning us all into cybernetic transhumans. I'm right about that, yes? Yeah, okay. Now, many of the concerns of our many correspondents are perfectly valid and based in fact. Some have argued that a guaranteed basic income would sap productivity and reward shirkers for doing nothing, or lead to labor shortages. Now, you might not agree, but that's a perfectly rational critique. Some have argued that Canada's COVID-battered economy could not afford such a program. I'd counter that it's entirely possible a well-designed program might actually save money, streamlining the number of social welfare support programs we have in this country. But an argument about possible costs is again perfectly reasonable. Some correspondents have raised legitimate questions about the bill, which I happen to share. The bill proposes to extend a guaranteed basic income to those 17 and up. And while I understand the logic of supporting emancipated teens or teens who fled abusive families, most 17-year-olds don't need a basic income. Nor can I agree with Senator Pate's proposition to pay guaranteed basic income to non-Canadians, such as temporary foreign workers. I have my own constitutional concerns as an Albertan about setting up such a federal income framework without the full cooperation, support, and buy-in of the provinces and First Nations. And we also need to be mindful of inflationary pressures a basic income might create, especially in overheated rental markets such as Vancouver and Toronto. So yes, it is perfectly possible to have a good faith, rational debate about the pros and cons of a universal basic income and the pros and cons of Senator Pate's particular suggested model. But it is next to impossible to have that debate while Canadian citizens, especially seniors and those with disabilities, are being subjected to a relentless campaign of online psychological terrorism. I have tried to use Twitter and Facebook to dispel the myths about this bill. I have tried to answer letters from people who just seem honestly confused. One woman I'll call Missy was so frightened by what she'd heard about Bill S-233, she told me she was thinking of leaving Canada. After I explained what S-233 actually said, she thanked me. "You have truly helped me," she wrote back. "I will do my best to spread what you have told me. It's scary how convincing this can be. I admit I fell for it and fed into it at times." She added, "It's scary to live in fear every day." And that, of course, is the point of this whole disinformation campaign, to create fear and distrust, to keep people scared and vulnerable, and to erode our social contract and social fabric, our confidence in our fellow Canadians, replacing it with suspicion bordering on paranoia. The purpose of this strategy isn't to defeat S-233, which has only the smallest chance of becoming law anyway. No, it's to whip up a hysterical frenzy to convince ordinary Canadians, decent, caring Canadians like Missy, that their political leaders and their political institutions are not to be trusted, and then to trick and con ordinary caring people, just like Missy, into sharing this fake information with their families, their faith communities, or their friends on Facebook. Rebutting these insidious campaigns is not easy. Although I did connect with Missy, I had less luck with a more recent correspondent. She wrote to me this weekend that she could not sleep over her fears that Canadian seniors would lose their pensions. When I tried to explain that S233 just wouldn't do that, she accused me of gaslighting her and demanded that I never contact her again. In her excellent essay published recently by The Line, conservative strategist Melanie Paradis coined a perfect phrase for these corrosive disinformation campaigns. She called them thought scams. She likened them to those Nigerian prince letters we all used to get, which tried to con us out of our money. But these thought scammers aren't primarily interested in getting rich. They are interested instead in stealing our faith and our trust, in stealing our Canada. And if we too fall prey, if we start demonizing our political opponents, portraying them as treasonous and corrupt, then we forfeit our ability as senators to have any good faith debates over vital public policy questions. So today, my friends, mes chers collègues, I am asking you to join me in standing up to the thought scammers. I ask you not to give a wink or a shrug or a smirk when you see one of these thought scams spreading because you think it might help your side or your team in the short term. I ask all of us here to stand united today, not in full-throated support of Bill S233, but in united support of truth, of reason, and of Canadian democracy itself. We in the Senate of Canada must stand as a bulwark against the tide of lies. We can, and my friends, we must. Thank you, merci, and hi hi.
We have 25 seconds left. So there was a few senators that wanted to ask you a question, but we're actually out of time. Granted for an additional 5 minutes? Agree. Senator Kutcher.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Senators, thank you very much for your extremely passionate and well conducted and well thought through speech on this issue. There certainly seems to be a coordinated disinformation campaign specifically around Bill S233, but it's not the only one that we are seeing. Bill C-67 being one, which isn't even in federal parliament. But in addition to the conspiracy theories that have infiltrated all this communication, there has been increasing concern recently, although this has been going on for some time now, about the role of malicious state actors, particularly Russia, in initiating much of this kind of campaign or in amplifying campaigns that are currently underway, with the clear intent of destabilizing democratic institutions. You mentioned some ideas that we need to, as parliamentarians, be involved in addressing this. Are there any specific things that you can share with us that you think that parliamentarians should be doing to address these kind of disinformation campaigns?
Senator Simons.
Thank you very much, Senator Kutcher. You know, as a child of the Cold War, it seems strange to me to stand in the Senate of Canada and talk about Russian plots. I mean, it seems like something from a Cold War movie. I wouldn't have thought that that was plausible until we saw the reporting in the United States about Russian actors manipulating Facebook to create mob mentalities, creating both fake Republican pages and fake Democrat pages, and then setting the pages against each other. So I think it's incumbent upon us, first of all, as citizens, all of us, not just senators, to practice what I call social media hygiene. Don't share something if you don't know where it's from or what it is. The more outrageous and anger-provoking the post, the less likely it is to be true. And I would also say that sometimes I've seen people retweeting stuff that they know is nonsense, ironically, or to call it out. Don't do that. Because when you share things and interact with them, the algorithm doesn't know that you're hate sharing. The algorithm just thinks, oh, people want to see that. So very careful in how you use social media in the sense of, we talked about safe sex, practice safe tweeting. But I think it's also incumbent upon us to think, in an age in which so many people get their information filtered through social media platforms, about what the correct responsibility of those platforms should be and what our responsibility should be as legislators to ensure that not that we're censoring debate, but that we're providing some kind of Brita filter for the information so that all the lies do not get the algorithmic juice to rise to the top. And I think it's fair to ask the major platforms, whether that's Twitter or Facebook or YouTube or all the new ones that come along, what their protocols are to guard against malicious campaigns by foreign actors, which are clearly designed to poison democratic debate in Western democracies.
We have two other senators wanting to question. Senator Lankin.
Madam Speaker, and Senator Simons, thank you. Another eloquent tour de force speech by you, and it's much appreciated. I particularly like the phrase that you brought forward from the conservative strategist about a thought scam. I'll elevate my language because I've been calling it a bot scam. And quite frankly, it's not just 233. This began immediately following the occupation that took place in Ottawa, and it involved communications legislation that you're just referring to and others. It is absolutely clear to me that a large majority of these have been electronically generated. When they come in 1,000 at a time and they have very similar themes, those are not individuals. I have also reached out to where it appeared to be a genuine and individual person to discuss, to tell them my views, to tell them what I think the reality is. But the other ones, any I've tried to reach, there is no reaching there, because there is no person. This is fundamentally an issue of an undermining of democracy. Do you, Senator Simons, think there is, beyond our individual actions, a collective response from the Senate that should be taken? The leaders of the various groups in the Senate, some of whom...
I'm sorry,
yes?
Time has elapsed. Senator Simon,
thank you.
Time has elapsed.
Concluding, one thing is something that famous advocate Scott Santens has talked about in his video, Think Like a Martian, about money and UBI. Essentially, he states how basic income creates a layer of trust because that is what a paradigm shift of UBI is. It's trust. It says you don't need to prove you deserve to live in a world that requires money for survival. We have made independently living off the land in the commons impossible. So basic income says, we will give you at least this foundation of money. No one is satisfied with just a foundation for a house any more than most people would want more than just their basic income and would want to find something to do. To quote Scott Santens, quote, "Trust is one thing we do not yet have an abundance of, but we can change that. If we humans were to decide to trust each other a minimum amount such that no human had no trust, but every human had some trust, and that amount of trust was sufficient enough for the resources needed to sustain life, then everything would change. That is what it comes down to. Can we, as a species, trust each other enough to say, yes, I trust you?" So right now, it is like we've built starships and we are stuck at the edge of our own galaxy, scared to go out there. We've sent out probes, i.e. the pilots, basic income pilots is what I mean, and everything has come back saying it's okay. The next thing to do is to move forward, but we're still not sure. This is where I feel we are right now. The challenge is, can we trust each other enough once and for all to say the words, okay, we can do this together. Let's go. Thank you for listening. Please check out my other references that are listed below this video. Thanks.